Welcome to the Jiu Jitsu Oracle review show of Who's Number One 22, a card that was headlined by Victor Hugo against Nick Rodriguez. Victor Hugo won the match by decision. Callum, what were your thoughts on the main event?
Yeah, so like we spoke about, we saw Victor Hugo quite happy to lay flat on his back and not play a seated guard. That denied Nicky Rod his main passing weapon, which is the body lock, forced Nicky Rod to display a different style of passing that we've not seen the most of out of him. He was doing a lot more outside passing, cross step into the hip line. This did a good job of tiring Victor Hugo out, but not as much as he could have. He didn't really put that much pressure on when he got to the hip line, as we call like the jeopardy point, the J point, and we talk about camping a lot these days. We didn't really see him hanging out there trying to put the pressure on Victor Hugo from there. So we did see him towards the end of the match get close to a couple pass attempts, but I think he would have had more success hanging out in those positions when he got around the outside of the guard.
If you go round the outside, it's all well and good, but you've got to get down. And I don't think Nicky Rod was ever at the position to get down on Victor and start getting towards the chest to chest position that he favours. One could say that the reason Nicky Rod spent a lot of time on the feet working the outside passing was to try and tire out Victor so that when he employed the body lock, it would be against a fatigued opponent. And as we saw in the match, it looked as if Victor was starting to get a bit more tired by the end of it. I would say, though, that as Callum identified, Nick Rodriguez wasn't able to exert enough pressure on Victor with the round passing to make Victor feel under stress. And therefore, Victor was able to get quite a good few off balances on Nicky Rod during the match and had the better of the action for the most part, despite being on his back against a player on the top who's incredibly strong at passing. Callum, what did you think about the guard that Victor employed as Nick Rodriguez was staying on the feet and working round in order to keep his opponent away?
Yeah, so he was employing a lot of kind of framing knee shield, Z guard, as well as some Deli Heaver, some R guard. He was elevating from the Deli Heaver position as well. Thankfully, we got to see a bit of Victor's close guard in action, which is always good to see. That's where Victor's best attack of the match came from. He managed to get just a classic close guard armbar setup, which resulted in also getting to see some of Nicky Rod's armbar defense, which is also really good to see. I managed to get out of that. But yeah, that was his main attack in the match. Definitely his main kind of attacking sequence from guard. He did manage later on in the match to get on top against Nicky Rod and get past momentarily and then take the back, and that kind of sealed the deal for the decision for Victor Hugo. But yeah, as far as the majority of the match, he was quite comfortable keeping Nicky Rod away, elevating him when he needed to. Even when Nicky Rod was close to getting past, we saw that palm frame on the hip, able to elevate Nicky Rod from there and not get pinned down inside control.
A closed guard armbar attack that was very useful in the career of Victor Hugo's coach, Jean-Jay Ribeiro. So if you're looking on at the match and you want to see more of classic close guard armbar attacks, even Nogi, when Jean-Jay did some Nogi matches more recently, we saw a lot of that classical style of close guard attack and armbars. So um, not a surprise to see Victor utilise that. I'm sure it's something they work on in training, but just a note to anyone who's tuning in, who's not watched much Janji Ribeiro in the past, definitely worth going back and checking out some of his matches. Um, Big question coming out of this match: where does it leave Victor Hugo in the grand scheme of things? And is Victor Hugo ready for the challenge of Gordon Ryan? What do you think, Callum?
Uh, Depends how you're asking the question. Ready for the challenge in terms of do we realistically think he can beat him? I mean, he has a chance of beating him. I don't know if that's a kind of realistic possibility, but I definitely think he's one of the very few guys that will give Gordon an interesting match at this point. A lot of the time on these super fight shows, it's just kind of been a display of whatever Gordon's been working on, whatever DVD Gordon wants to sell. He's going to do that on his opponent, um, which is good to see from a technical point of view. But if you actually want a compelling match, something that has a bit of drama about it, that we could see someone beat Gordon, I think Victor's one of the very few guys right now to be able to do that.
I think the match that we just saw with Victor against Nick Rodriguez doesn't illustrate enough as to whether Victor would be able to now deal with the passing pressure that Gordon puts on his opponents. And there's probably no one else in the world at that weight class that can pass like Gordon. So unless they face off again, I don't know if we will be able to judge that Victor is now ready to face that top game from Gordon. As we talked about, I don't think Nick Rodriguez was able to get close enough to Victor to really ask the same kind of questions that Gordon will ask. Is there anyone else outside of Gordon that you would like to see Victor go up against?
I think Merigali would be an interesting one. A little bit undersized, but we've seen Merigali quite happily jump into the absolute divisions, and even Nicky Rod was a bit undersized against Victor Hugo. I think most people are going to be. You tend to, for some of these heavier guys. Obviously, you've got the gigantic kind of overweight guys that are 300-400 pounds, and then you've got a few guys like Buchecha, Victor Hugo that are like a solid athletic 260, and then most guys tend to float around the 220, 230. So I think guys around that weight that could give him a good match would be Meregali, Kynan perhaps. I think those would be two interesting matches to see. Nogi.
And for anyone going to watch the match, or if you've already seen it, you might rewatch it. I just want to touch on Victor Hugo's guard and his ability to work between close guard, Z guard slash knee shield, however you want to reference it, and R guard slash double De La Hiva, however you want to reference it. Three really similar foot positions. You're essentially like crossing one ankle over the other. Depends whether you're wrapping it around your partner's waist or whether you're on your side and you're wrapping it around the upper portion of one of their legs as they're into a sort of knee cut position, or you're underneath their leg with your connection and it's a De La Hiva with a second De La Hiva hook added to it. But I think that's something that I've been playing around with in my training, and I think it's three guard positions that work well together. And unsurprisingly, given his nickname, Big Man Flow, we saw Victor Hugo really able to utilize those positions in the match against Nicky Rod. The other area that I'll ask Callum to speak about and we'll touch on another match is the ability to elevate from De La Hiva, particularly against a standing opponent that's not pressuring you that hard, but they're standing quite upright. And I know that's something that you like to utilize. And it was quite impressive that Victor was able to get Nicky Rod elevated in the match.
Yeah, quite underutilized, I think, in Nogi, that Delahiva position. Um, Definitely see a lot in the gi, especially with that collar grip, you're able to bend someone's posture over, and it gives you a nice pocket to put your foot on the hip. But definitely something that can be utilized in nogi. And like we've spoken about in some of the previous podcasts, it's interesting seeing some of these top gi guys coming over and adjusting their gi games, because you don't really see these kind of no gi only guys like Gordon, like Taza, like Craig. They don't really utilize Del Hiva as much some of these other positions. So I think it's cool now that we're getting. Well, we've always had gi guys obviously competing in the no gi, but some of the newer gi games coming over and making adjustments into the no gi game. It'll be cool how that kind of interacts with what the standard no gi guys are doing, and whether that kind of comes into the meta of the no gi game.
Very interesting area to look at because there's been this suggestion that gi and no gi are separate. I don't necessarily agree with that, but we're now seeing the influence of the gi players coming to the no gi game and adding something different to the mix. So definitely worth tracking that over the next year or so as we see more gi players come in to the no gi game and how they're able to make adaptations to their game and really add to the flavor of no gi jiu jitsu.
Speaking of
Talking of
top guys coming over, got
Tainan
Tainan
Dalpra,
versus Oliver Taza.
another very impressive performance from Tainan Dalpra against Oliver Taza. Tainan won a pretty convincing decision, but we saw some nice no-gi jiu-jitsu from Tainan, some wrestling that he was utilising that we don't traditionally see him use in the gi. What did you think about his performance overall, Callum?
Yeah, great performance, and I think great matchmaking as well. Just because obviously you've got an extremely strong positional game from Tynan. Great subs as well. We've not obviously been able to see that much of him in the Nogi, so we'll see how his kind of submissions carry over to the Nogi. But we enjoy seeing Tynan Dalpra passing people's guards. Luckily, he was matched up against Oliver Taza. Obviously, he passed Taza's guard, but Taza's not the kind of guy that will just get held down in these positions. He's got very good defense, very good at turtling, standing back up. So we got a lot of resets, and we got more opportunities to see Tynan pass guard, and we got more opportunities to see Taza work as escape. So a lot of action in this match, a lot of cool sequences that we got to see. But yeah, definitely Tynan's first legit. I don't want to disrespect his first opponent, but it was a bit of a kind of feeding the lamb to slaughter with that, which is fair enough. Tynan's first match, but definitely the first threatening no-gi match that we've seen from Tynan, and definitely passed with flying colours.
So we saw a takedown from a single leg. We saw another takedown that I think was mainly as a result of Taza being off balanced, albeit with Tynan's pressure through the takedown. And another part of the match, we saw that something different from Tynan was utilising the body lock grip for passing, which he doesn't do in the gi. So he's definitely making some alterations for no gi jiu jitsu, and they definitely seem to be working. Uh, the question mark before was how would he do if someone got in on his legs, and I think his positioning throughout the match meant that Taza never got a sniff of any entries.
Yeah, he attempted one or two, but Tynan saw it coming and was quite easily able to move his leg out in time, deal with it early enough that it was never really a threat to begin with.
I just want to highlight Taza's defence in the match. He was in side control bottom a couple of times, but did well to turn away, stand up, get it back to standing. Although, if you're watching that match and you think, well, I'll try that strategy, and you're in the gi, I would say that if you watch Tynan as people turn away in the gi, very quick to latch on to the collar, not only take the back but end up in choking positions. So I think it was a good strategy from Taza to use in no gi jiu-jitsu because that threat wasn't there. I'd just be super wary of using it in gi jiu-jitsu, especially against someone like Tainan Dalpra.
Yeah, cool to see him use some of the reverse C positions, over back positions to stand up. Was actually going over the reverse C with one of the MMA fighters that I PT. I thought it would be quite good for him to add into his game, and I think kind of highlighted to me that I think it's good for the kind of evolution of MMA grappling. The fact that the no-gi meta is very going in the way of a lot of like wrestling heavy action, a lot of not accepting kind of bottom positions and pins and standing back up, because you see guys like Craig and other guys coming up with like cool solutions to do that, and I think that'll kind of evolve the MMA grappling scene as well, because it's a lot more applicable to MMA than some of the other styles that we've seen come in and out of fashion.
So talking about wrestling and no-gi jiu-jitsu, let's talk about a match that featured quite a lot of exciting action on the feet. It was Mica Galvao against Kenta Iwamoto. Mica won by rear naked choke after an exciting match with a lot of exchanges. Callum, how did you see the match?
Very entertaining match. I think if I was to try sell watching professional grappling to someone that doesn't do jiu-jitsu and had to pick a match, this would definitely be one of the top matches. A lot of good stand-up exchanges. A lot of those standing up exchanges resulted in cool submission sequences, which is kind of what people want to see, especially the guys that aren't training and aren't kind of hyper focused on small details of positions. They want to see these kind of fast, scrambly actions, cool submission attempts, cool takedown attempts. So this match had them all. Obviously, highlighting the well-roundedness of Mica that we've already spoke about. He was comfortable enough to stay on the feet. Anytime Kenta did get in on a takedown, it was, except from one, resulting in him having to defend a submission attempt. When he got on top, looked very solid with the passing attempts, multiple submission attempts. So great overall performance from Mica, but also credit to Kenta, who was able to stay in the match. He was able to at least have an area to give Mica problems, which was the stand up, even though when he went for a lot of these takedowns, he did land in some deep submission attempts. But at least he had an area to kind of push Mica on, and he was durable enough to stay in the match. That again, we got to see a lot of these sequences. Whereas if there wasn't a good matchup in that aspect, if it was someone that Mica could have just sniped the first minute of the match, we wouldn't have got to see that. So that's kind of less fun sequences for us to see as the viewers.
Yeah, so the finish came after about 11 minutes. Kenta withstood some really strong armbar attacks from Mica with some great defense and escapes. One thing I would say though is that he kind of got himself into a bit of bother with the wrestling because he was attacking Mica round about the mid range of Mica's body, so that when the takedown was happening, Mica was able to latch onto an arm or the neck and immediately counter. And one thing I thought was interesting is Kenta did score a clean takedown in the match, but it came as a result of him shooting much lower, making sure both of Mica's legs were controlled, and making sure that Mica's butt, then his back, hit the mat, so that Mica couldn't immediately just sit up and lunge forward and start wrapping up an arm or the neck. So I just think it highlights the danger, particularly when you go against someone who's as exceptional as Mica is at countering, that you've got to be very careful with how you engage their body, especially round about the hips, because you can leave yourself open to counters, which doesn't really happen so much outside of submission grappling, because guys aren't going to immediately like jump on a guillotine or an armbar. So I thought Kenta made an adjustment later in the match, scored a cleaner takedown, but that would just be a warning that I would take out of the match as to how to employ wrestling against someone who's exceptional at submissions. Another match where there was someone involved who's a really good wrestler, but we didn't see that much wrestling in the match, is Dante Leon against Diego Pato. Going into the match, we were wondering whether size would be a factor. Dante coming down a little bit for where he has been competing. Very good on the feet, very good on the top. Diego Pato coming up a little bit from where he traditionally competes, and he was going to be on the bottom, we thought, in the match, and that he was, as it turned out. But size wasn't really a factor in this, and Diego Pato's guard was outstanding throughout and eventually led to a heel hook finish. Callum, what are your thoughts on Diego Pato's performance against Dante?
Yeah, so obviously got the submission in the second half of the match, but before that, I would say from his guard was in complete control for pretty much all of the match. I think Dante had one opportunity to get in on a double unders. Pato didn't seem too phased about it, got out quite easily, but Dante was, to be fair, quite happy to play in Pato's guard. He was kind of wrapped up in Pato's guard the whole time, wasn't trying to kind of do any anti jiu jitsu or skirt around the outsides. Um, Saying that, he was pretty much on the defense and reacting to what Pato was trying to do the whole match. We've seen some of the interplay, like we talked about, between Dante's knee cut and Pato's false reap. Dante, when he was in his good passing position, was pretty much just dealing with that false reaping leg coming over the top, not able to really get much going. Seeing Pato play a lot of R guard, double del Hiva, which we spoke about with Victor Hugo, and again, he was very much reacting to Pato not able to get his own game going, which fair enough. Pato was a very dangerous, very good guard as well, so obviously you have to deal with whatever threat is coming, but to really kind of have success, you need to get into your own game and get your own offensive cycles on the go, which Dante just wasn't able to do the whole match.
I thought Diego Pat was very good at playing guard on both sides. Towards his left side, it was more R guard, double De La Hiva that he was using, and guards around about that. And then as he was going away to what would have been his right side, he was engaging guard such as K guard and getting into attacks that way. But yeah, super impressive to see his comfort level playing guard. Wasn't really bothered about like what side he was playing guard on. Never really looked in danger um, for giving up a pass, but more to the point, he was the one that I thought was pressuring throughout, even although he was on his back. Scored the heel hook finish. Callum, talk us through what happened at the end, please.
Yeah, so managed to enter into the far side leg. Actually, I'll need to go over the video again, but it actually looked like Dante almost gave up the heel. So typically, when you're in a leg entanglement like that, you want to start kind of facing the other way and deny them the ability to access the heel in the first place, and then only if they catch the heel and you can't slip, will you start turning towards the toes. So obviously, I'm not questioning Dante's leg lock defense. He's one of the best grapplers in the world. Could have been a case of he was kind of off balance in that direction, but either way, Pat was able to get a clean bite on the heel and just followed through the whole time to get a good finish. Um, Going off of just recent kind of leg lock displays in competition, got to kind of put Pato as probably the best leg locker in the world right now. Obviously, we've got amazing guys like Gordon and Craig, but we've not really seen them display their leg lock ability in competitions recently. Where as Pato, we've seen like a diverse attack of leg locks, heel hooks, knee bars, toe holds, straight ankle locks, Z locks. We've seen pretty much everything from him against like very, very high level opponents. Very excited to see him going into this ADCC as well. Obviously, had an amazing year last year between all his wins in gi and no gi. Starting this year off with a bang, so I'll be excited to see how he progresses into ADCC.
So a bold claim from Callum. Diego Pato, best leg locker in the world right now. Is he ahead of the likes of Matej Szczynski? Let us know your thoughts. Contact us on Instagram or leave comments wherever you access the Jiu Jitsu Oracle.
Yeah,
But
one I'd
I,
like to see Pato, which I don't think we will see because Mikey's tied up in his one contract, but I think that would be a really great match to see. I think last time they fought was in the gi, and Mikey actually footlocked Pato from double pull, but obviously we've seen Pato develop his leg lock game a lot since then, so I think stylistically that would be a really fun match to see, even though potentially unlikely to happen.
great shout regarding the versatility of Pato's leg locks, though. While some guys have particular strengths in one or two aspects of the footlock game, I think you're right in highlighting that Pato's got a range of attacks, and not only that, but like all of those attacks are extremely strong. And when he latches on to something, it's pretty much breaking pressure pretty quick. One thing I would like to have a look at again, I just can't remember off the top of my head, was Dante was in a footlock earlier in the match. I don't know whether it was the same foot that he ultimately had attacked for the submission.
Yeah,
So perhaps a bit of damage was done earlier. And I also just think on the heel hook that Diego was so far ahead in the attack that by the time Dante started to react, the submission was pretty much on anyway. So there wasn't much wriggle room. Heel hooks were kind of the flavour of the night for submission outside of Mica on the main card. We had two matches that ended with leg locks pretty quickly. First was Jacob Couch against Sebastian Rodriguez. Jacob employed a leg lock attack that Callum works uh, extensively. So, Callum, talk us through how Jacob managed to secure the submission against Sebastian Rodriguez.
Yeah, so obviously trend in jiu-jitsu that kind of different things come in and out of fashion, come in and out of cycle. I think the outside heel hook was kind of the main attack with the start of the leg lock revolution. Then people started focusing more on the inside, and I think people were starting to go away from the outside heel hook a bit because it became a bit easy to defend. It was quite one dimensional, but now that we see people able to attack the straight ankle lock a lot more effectively these days, it gives you a great dilemma when you attack because if you go for the outside heel hook and someone points their toes and slips their heel, they've put their foot into extension, so that makes it very easy to then put on an ankle lock. And then same thing vice versa. If they defend the ankle lock by putting the boot on and turn their toes in, then it gives you a really good bite on the heel. So I think if you get good at that skill of jumping between those two, it makes it an absolute nightmare to defend. I've trained with people that are very good at this, and it is an absolute nightmare. And myself employing that into my game as well, it's definitely increased my kind of submission success from these kind of straight leg lock positions when I've employed both of them at the same time. And yeah, Jacob, not only in this match but also in his recent trials matches as well, has started employing this really well.
And another leg lock attack that you're not shy about going for is similar to what Adele Fornarino used to submit Tubby Alequin. Very quick submission, inside about 30 seconds. Callum, tell us how Adele managed to secure the victory in her match, please.
Yeah, so managed to enter in underneath the legs, got to like a butterfly ashy sort of position, got the bite on the Aoki lock. We've seen Tubby start to move out towards the toes. Obviously, you wouldn't want to rotate in the way that would put the submission on itself, but Adele did a really good job of following all the way through until it got to like a bent down sort of position. That kind of put a little bit of a pause in the movement and the rotation, and as well kind of gave Adele an opportunity to really drive her hips through the submission and drive down with gravity through the submission, and that resulted in a pretty devastating break. Maybe that it looks like she was quite injured afterwards, so hopefully she's all right. But yeah, very good following through on the leg lock and finishing.
So that concludes the main card. For us, the two big questions coming out were, is Victor ready for Gordon, and is Diego Pato the best leg locker in the world? Please let us know what you think, and any good comments we'll chat about on um, our next podcast. We'll be back to preview the ADCC European trials, which take place next weekend in Croatia. It's the second Euro trials. So those that weren't successful first time around will be trying to punch their ticket to the World Championships in Vegas later this year. There was one match on the undercard that I think's worth highlighting before we go, and that was another really good performance from Elijah Dorsey. We'd said on our preview podcast, which if you didn't watch or listen to, go back, check it out. You'll find out how we did with our predictions about how the matches would go. But Elijah was able to display good all round jiu jitsu, take down, pass in, got to the back, secured a submission where his opponent went to defend by defend an attempt at a choke by bringing his arms up, and Elijah took the elbow really high over the top of the shoulder, started cranking back, a lot of pressure on the shoulder, a lot of pressure on the pec. Shout out to our teammate Ben Campbell, who I've seen hit this submission in competition. I believe the submission is yet to be named, and if there was a name for it, I reckon Callum would know what that name is. But if you have an idea as to what that's called, give us a shout, clue us up, and if we see it hit again in competition, we'll be able to give it its proper name. Just on Elijah overall, Callum, what have you
Yeah.
seen from him recently, and where do you think his jiu-jitsu is going to take him this year?
Yeah, so solid wrestling, solid passing. Not only solid passing, but it looks like an absolute nightmare to score on if you're in the bottom position against him. We're seeing more and more of this from kind of good wrestlers. A buzz term that I've heard recently is rumble passing. So I think Elijah kind of falls into that category. If you're not comfortable with the guy standing back up, and then you having to wrestle him, you see a lot of guys going into the guard and pressuring. But if you're quite happy for the guy to stand up at you because you've got the superior wrestling, and you're quite happy to be elusive, it leads quite well into this rumble passing where you're going around the outside a little bit and not letting the guy entangle you up. So that's something we see really well from Elijah, as well as a solid wrestling game and just overall positional game, and been an absolute nightmare to score on.
I think he's going to be very active this year, gi and no gi as well. So definitely someone worth keeping tabs on. And I always try and tune in when I can to see him compete because he's very exciting and good at all ranges of jiu-jitsu. Um, that concludes the latest edition of the Jiu Jitsu Oracle. As I said, we'll be back with a full preview of the European trials. Until then, keep training, catch up on the matches that we've just talked about, try and implement some of what you've seen, and give us a shout if you've got any response to our big questions coming out of the show.